So now I just want to go ahead and welcome you all and tell you to be ready. This is really exciting for us. And welcome Betsy Hill, our President and COO at Learning Enhancement Corporation, with our presentation.
Thank you, Sarah. Again, I want to extend my appreciation to everybody for joining us this afternoon. Sarah, I'm not seeing the slides yet, but I assume that you're working on that.
And I thought you were doing them, so I have to get them.
Okay, sorry. Just wanted to say how pleased I am also to have joining me Curtis Bomer, who's a speech and language pathologist with the Huron Intermediate School District. And Curtis and I have the great good fortune of just being back from Boston, where we made a presentation at the Learning in the Brain conference. And so we're especially delighted to hear from you, or to share with you today some of what we presented there, but also some of what we learned there. And so that's what we're planning to be doing with you today. So the first thing I wanted to do, as we talk about the promise of technology for in developing 21st century skills, we want to look a little bit at what 21st century skills are so that we have a context for what we're going to be presenting. And then Curtis and I are going to be talking about 4 particular technologies that are being used in the Harbor Beach Community School District and where they are being embraced and having some great results. And so we want to take both a sort of a little bit of a theoretical and research-based approach, but also a very practical approach in terms of things that are working. So, and hope this will provide some good fodder for discussion. So when we start to look at the skills involved that our students are going to have in the 21st century, there was a number of presentations, but perhaps summarized best at the Learning in the Brain conference by Tony Wagner, who is with the Technology and Entrepreneurship Center at Harvard and has written a book called The Global Achievement Gap. And he and others discussed the skills that are going to be critical for success in career, college, and citizenship, things like critical thinking and collaboration across networks. When he talked about critical thinking, he described it as it's in the mission statement, but it's not on the test, meaning that we all can agree that we want our students to be able to think well, but one of the greatest criticisms in higher education and employers is that graduates really can't think. And it's not necessarily something that we have figured out a good and routine way of assessing. Collaboration. Our students are networked on their iPhones, on Facebook, on Twitter. They are led by peers through influence, not necessarily by any kind of authoritarian mechanism. But on the other hand, when they get to school, we often have them operating in isolation. And how do we want to teach and model how to work in teams? We'll talk a little bit about that today. Agility and adaptability. We've created schools to be very predictable and very regularized, and that may not be the best thing. Not to say that structure isn't important and some level of predictability, but when the system rewards regularized responses and predictable work, that sometimes can be a disservice. Initiative and entrepreneurialism, which all of these presenters very closely connected with creativity. When I started my career a couple of years ago, spending less than 5 years at a job was really frowned upon. Today, my children expect to spend a year or two at a job and then to be changing. So the idea of changing and the idea of trying a lot of different new things is important. And the presenters at Learning in the Brain who talked about this talked about that the price of initiative is often failure. So you have to be willing to fail. You have to be willing to fail early and often and to learn from mistakes. Sometimes our educational system doesn't really encourage failure and doesn't really encourage learning from mistakes. Sometimes it's just all about points off instead of actually using those failures as a basis for figuring out where to focus and how to improve. I did hear one wonderful story about a high school that focuses on entrepreneurialism and has recognized the need to allow students to fail and then to recoup. But one of the students said, but we don't talk about failure, we talk about iteration. And so it's sort of a different mindset of what's important about that type of learning process. Effective written and oral communications, we probably have all heard as much about that as anything else. Accessing and analyzing information. A lot of discussion at the conference about how knowledge is basically a commodity today. It's everywhere and anywhere at the touch of a fingertip. Whether or not it's good is another story. But being able to access, analyze, and evaluate the value of information is something our students will need to be able to do. And then finally, curiosity and imagination. We're all born with an enormous endowment of curiosity, and how can we, as educators, foster that curiosity and imagination? And so we'll unpack that process a little bit more in a while. So we've got all this list of skills, and most of you are probably familiar with the model that Sarah's going to show on the next slide, which is something that was created by the Partnership for 21st Century Skills. And it puts all these newer skills, not that we probably haven't recognized that they were important all along, but these skills that seem to become so important in the 21st century, together with the core subjects and the things that we've traditionally thought about as being in school. Not that there is that distinct a line between them when you really start to get into that. But the skills that our students are going to need are at the top, and the summary circles below represent the tools that we have at our disposal to help them develop those skills. So if we start to take this as a model and figure out the role of technology, how technology supports these, we can look at it as both with an understanding of the bottom part of the model and the top part of the model. So, for example, at the bottom of the model, it can be one of the tools that we use to support 21st century learning. At the top of the model, we have to figure out how technology actually enables us to teach those skills. So what we want to look at today are some technologies that are really brain compatible for both parts of that model, and we wanted to do it with the very practical view of Harbor Beach, which many of these tools were implemented under the superintendent, who has now just recently left and gone to another tool, but he really emphasizes tools that are information age tools, 21st century tools, and that it's a very different kind of thinking and a very different kind of emphasis. So, like it or not, technology is here. We probably can't accomplish what we need to without including it in our mission. So I'm going to now pose 3 questions that will sort of guide us and that we'll talk about as we talk about each of these technologies. First of all, where does it fit within the 21st century skills model? We want to articulate and be clear on what we think its role is and how it supports the development of these skills. Secondly, the way that we always approach things is, how does this address how the brain learns? Is this brain compatible? Is it consistent with what we understand from research about the learning and teaching process? And then finally, what are the results? Are they measurable and are they significant? So we're going to talk about this in the context of 4 particular technologies, which we're now going to show in the context of the 21st century skills model. So the 4 technologies we're going to look at today are, first of all, sound field amplification, and this obviously affects the learning environment that our students are in. The second is student response systems, which is a component of assessment and feedback. Mobile interactive whiteboards, a tool that supports collaboration and communication, which are 2 of those 4 C's at the very top of the model. And then finally, cognitive skills development, which can arguably be said to affect a lot of things, but we're going to talk about it specifically today as it relates to the other 2 C's at the top of the model, critical thinking and creativity. So as we do that, we always like to model what we're talking about, and we are going to now use our own student response system, which is actually an audience response system in this case, and we have a little poll that we would like you to respond to. And just to tell us which of these technologies, if any, you are using in your school or schools. So I know Sarah's going to put, oh, there it is. So if you could just take a moment and click on yes or no for each of these technologies: sound field amplification, student response systems, and mobile whiteboards, and cognitive skills development technology, then we will be able to give you a little status update of what we find. And in the meantime, I'm hoping that Curtis has been unmuted, and we'll be able to start commenting as well. So, Sarah, how are we doing with our poll?
Well, the poll is now finished. You really are taxing me here, having me switch slides and run the poll and unmute Curtis all at the same time.
All right, Superwoman, we expect that.
Talk about multitasking. The poll is finished, and it's got about 13 seconds left to process, and then I can quick show the results for you.
Okay, well then while we're waiting, why don't we go ahead, and what I'd like to do now is introduce Curtis Bomer, who is a speech and language pathologist with the Huron Intermediate School District up in the thumb of Michigan. Oh, no, he's not. We're going to see the little poll. So it looks like we have quite a number, sort of split on all of them, and it looks like the most commonly used technology is actually cognitive skills development, but there are, in each case, about a third to a half of the group that is actually using each of these various technologies. So hopefully we'll get some experience, and we certainly welcome those who are using the technologies to add information in your chat window as we go through this. And we are happy to share any comments that come through that way with the attendees. So what I'd like to do now is we're going to start looking at our first technology, sound field amplification, and I'd like to turn the floor over to Curtis.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Curtis Bomer, and working in Harbor Beach. I've been on the school board in Harbor Beach, and I'm the speech pathologist assigned to the school district there now. Harbor Beach a number of years ago went through a renovation project, and one of the technologies that we were able to get into every classroom were sound field amplification systems. The reason we did that is because research had shown that in classrooms, the average ambient noise level was about 60 decibels, and that the average teacher's voice also projected at about 60 decibels. So if you're a student who has ADHD and is not paying attention, has a small hearing impairment, whether that be permanent or whether it be transient in nature, or just someone who's easily distracted, you missed a lot of information in what the teacher was saying, because the ambient noise in the rooms would negate the softer voice of the teacher, the softer sounds, and your brain naturally fills those sounds in unless you have some difficulties. And so we wanted to be able to raise the level of the teacher's voice without raising the stridency in the voice itself. As a person speaks and they raise their voice to get louder and louder, the stridency in the voice and the actual tone of the voice changes, and can send a mixed message to the listeners, rather than one of caring and imparting information, one of demanding and angry and things like that. So we wanted to help with that process. Research had also shown us that schools that used sound field systems had slightly higher test scores, and students commented that they had a better understanding of what was going on in the classroom. And it also helped with teachers' vocal health. and there was less sore throats, less vocal abuse going on, and the teachers were healthier. We think it's been really good. The downside to a sound field system is it does take a little bit of training to get used to. You need to remember to turn your microphone off when you're having private conversations out in the hallway or going to the bathroom. You also need to learn how to use the system itself. For example, we had a new teacher this year come in and use the system for the very first time, and you could hear her voice clear down the entire hallway to the office area because she had it so loud. And as a result, behavior in her classroom was fairly poor because the kids were just on edge because of the loud sounds. We got her to turn the amplification down to a fairly normal level, just barely above what her regular voice projected at, and she was absolutely amazed at what behavior changes happened in the classroom. We've had fairly good luck with it, and I think it was an excellent piece of technology for us to be using.
Wonderful, thank you. Now we're going to move on and talk about student response systems, and having given you our own example, I think this is actually one of the ways perhaps that Harbor Beach has used this kind of technology. But I'll let Curtis go ahead and describe that.
It absolutely is one of the ways we've used the technology. Quick surveys in the classroom for the teacher. A number of our teachers use it to give students immediate feedback or near immediate feedback. We know that if you're taking a test or you're doing a worksheet and you're writing the answers down on Tuesday night and you hand it in on Wednesday and the teacher doesn't check it until Thursday and you don't get it back until Friday or even maybe Monday, then what was the use of doing the exercise and then the teacher trying to give feedback 4 to 5 days later? It's actually has been found to be fairly useless. The more immediate the feedback, the more learning that can actually take place, and the more relevant the questions and the students believe, the more relevant the actual work itself. So Harbor Beach uses it often to do warm-ups in the beginning of the session of a class on past things that have been taught. That gives the teacher an immediate idea as to whether or not the current day's lesson is appropriate or whether he or she has to go back in and do some spiraling that day to begin the lesson. They use it for cool downs at the end of the session or class to determine whether or not the objectives were met that day for the majority of the students. And if they were, great, and maybe we can move on. Or if they weren't, then what part of the lesson wasn't met, and they recycle and reteach that portion of the lesson the next day until the students have mastery of that lesson. During class, teachers use it. In fact, in our middle school social studies classes, they use it a lot to do in-class worksheets that allow the teacher to present and walk around the room while the students are answering. She can immediately have it downloaded into the grade book as to how they did, and then she can see what they did and can go back and reteach areas that the majority of students are having difficulty with. And she can also target individual students when she breaks them up into groups to put those students that have concepts learned working with those students that don't have the concepts. And they also use them for tests. And some of the online testing systems work well with the system that we have. We have a system called Clickers, and there are other systems out there. But I know a number of the online testing services that our teachers use work well with that, and the students can just go through at their own pace and do that.
Great. I want to underscore one thing that Curtis was just talking about, because there is really now a lot of research that is showing very compellingly that using tests and practice tests in this way is a real driver of student learning. Because it's that effortful retrieval of information rather than just reviewing and restudying the same information.
and that it lets the students then identify the areas where they are weak in, and all of those components really can drive learning a lot more effectively and a lot more quickly. So it's wonderful to see that actually happening. All right, the third technology I want to talk a little bit about today is mobile interactive whiteboards. And Curtis, why don't you tell us about how these are being used?
Yeah, the system we use in Harbor Beach is are called Mobies. They're just handheld. We have up to 4 of them in a classroom. We generally don't use them below 3rd grade. 2nd grade uses them once in a while. And they could be used in kindergarten and 1st grade, but the teachers don't use them a whole lot down there. Mostly in high school and middle school. They're used for a number of reasons. Number one, it allows the teacher to move around the room constantly while lecturing or asking questions, and doesn't require the teacher to be at the whiteboard to put information down. She or he just writes it on the board on the Mobi, the mobile board, and it's automatically projected up onto the whiteboard for the students. That's one of the reasons they use it. It allows the teacher to be around the room, and there's always those students who are not the best behaved and need to have someone in authority standing close by them, and that allows the teacher to do that without necessarily sending them up to the front of the classroom where they can distract the whole classroom. So it's used as a classroom management tool. It's also used to put out graphic and visual presentations that both the teacher and the students have done. We'll hand them out to groups when they divide the classroom into groups. The teachers will hand them out and may pose different responsibilities for different groups. So, for instance, Group 1 may need to come up with a question about the topic, and Group 2 needs to answer the question after discussion, or all the groups will have to answer the question after discussion. It will allow them to put their answers up on the board all at the same time and to view it without having a lot of disruptive interaction going on in the classroom. It also allows the teacher to ask the same question and have the groups think about the process and come up with answers. Perhaps they need to write the processes down on the boards, and all 4 of the answers will show up in their segment of the whiteboard, and it allows them to carry on conversations from that. An example of what one classroom did this past year, with the census being completed, political boundaries across the country had to be redrawn, and in Huron County, where our school district is no different. Our county commissioners' districts had to be redrawn, and so we brought the information in from the redistricting committee at the county level into the classroom, gave the students all the information they needed, and provided them with additional information that they requested. They then broke up into committees, pretending they were from different parts of the county and representing those parts of the county, the different geographic areas, and they redrew the district boundaries based on where they were representing. And then they came together using the whiteboards. They came together and had a discussion and continued to redraw until they came up with one plan. That one plan was then submitted to the county redistricting board, and it was not accepted. It was not approved. It was accepted. The plan was accepted, but it was not the approved plan. But they did come in second place. It was the second most popular plan that was presented, which we all thought was really great because it gave them a lot of real-life experience as to how government works, and it was just one way that we used the Mobies. And it also allows the teacher to control the classroom, but allows the students to be the center of attention and have them be the center that the teacher's focusing on. And those shy students who in math class don't want to go up and write on the board and give their answers up on the board in middle school, like I was, get to sit at their desk and do it, and they don't have to stand up in front of everyone. So it serves a number of purposes.
Chris, when people talk about these particularly being useful for helping students develop their collaboration skills. I think you've touched on that a little bit, and their communication skills. Could you just expand on that a little bit more?
Certainly. We use them so that, because we put a lot of our classrooms will place our students into small or large groups, and work from there when it comes to a daily lesson. And because we know that one of the job skills that they're going to need to have when they get out of school is that collaboration skill. And it was hard for a number of our teachers to grasp onto, because teachers, even though we work in a collaborative setting at times, once we close that door, we tend to be pretty isolated and tend to not be collaborative. So it was a skill that a number of our teachers needed to learn also. But it's one that we decided to emphasize in Harbor Beach, and the mobile whiteboards were a way that we could do that. Now, it's been traditionally done in a number of ways without mobile whiteboards in the past. You work in small groups and you have a group project, but these allow for daily work to be done in the group projects, in the small groups, and communicating to the classroom all at the same time. And it also allows the teacher access to see what the group is working on and how they're progressing at the same time. So it gives the teacher feedback, immediate feedback, so they can go over and work and concentrate on those groups that are having difficulty or seem to have a question that they're just not being focused the right way. So the immediate feedback of these works both in favor of the teacher and for the students. I think that's about it.
Okay, great. All right, so now we want to move on to the fourth technology that we are going to talk a little bit about today, or that we're prepared to actually cover. We may end up, in response to questions, talking about some other things as well. We're certainly open to that. And that's cognitive skills development. And today we do a lot of talking about cognitive skills development, as many of you probably know, but we particularly wanted to talk about it in the context of critical thinking and creativity today. And of course, these are, just like a lot of the other things that we talk about, processes that happen in the brain, and many brain processes can be trained because we know our brains are plastic. That is, neural connections can be created and strengthened or pruned depending on what our brains are being asked to do. But there's a lot of interest now in thinking about how we would actually go about training skills like creativity and critical thinking. And of course, that presumes that we actually know what we're talking about when we're talking about creativity and critical thinking. And so I wanted to share some information that was part of a number of the presentations at the Learning in the Brain conference, because I think it gives some insights into some of the more recent research that's been happening on here. And this is a list that I have culled from a number of sources and a number of the presentations that are there are lots of definitions, of course, of critical thinking. It's been discussed for a long, long time, but these are some of the processes that appear over and over again and are characterized by many of the researchers who are doing work in this field as being important in critical thinking. Research and evaluation, focused attention, sequential reasoning, pattern perception, discrimination, and on down the list. And one of the things that you may observe is that some of these skills seem really fairly generic, like the ability to focus attention or consciously direct our thought. And indeed, I think that those are very broadly applicable skills that we use in just about everything that we do, and can be arguably applied in just about any domain. But there are others of these that also require some domain expertise, some learning and knowledge in a particular field, such as concept formation and perspectives. It's a little difficult to form a concept unless you're forming a concept around something, around some set of information, or to understand different perspectives unless it's in relationship to a particular situation or problem. And then some of them seem to be a combination, such as pattern recognition, pattern perception. We certainly are born to recognize patterns. In fact, there was a wonderful example that was given at the conference where the iPod Shuffle which was originally designed as a purely random generation of whatever songs and music you had on your iPod. They got so many complaints from people who said, no, I'm hearing these types of songs too many times. So what was happening is that they had to program it not to be random so that it would actually be perceived as being random by the people using the iPods, because we're so constantly in our brains looking for patterns. At any rate, so these are some of the key processes here. I want to take a little look now at creativity, and then we can delve a little bit more into how all of these mental processes fit together and how they can be developed. So the research on creativity, this is based in large degree on work that has been conducted by Shelley Carson at Harvard University, and where she has developed what she calls brain sets. And we're probably all familiar with the concept of a mindset, but a brain set is it's really at the biological level, and these are patterns of neural activation in the brain that are correlated with mental states or with mindsets. And so when she's talking about creativity, she's able to actually identify the brain activity that's involved in some of these processes, and she's done a tremendous amount of work on creativity. And when she talks about creativity, or when the researchers do, they tend to distinguish between two types of creative pathways. One's called trial and error, and the other one's generally referred to as insight, or the aha moment. And they're very different kinds of processes. Trial and error, of course, is the tried and true, being willing to do something and then have that not work. Thomas Edison is famous for having taken this approach to inventing things and his creative process, and famously said that he had not failed 10,000 times. He had just shown 10,000 ways not to create a light bulb. And that's really inherent in this whole process. And any of you who happen to be able to be part of our last Neuroscience and Education webinar with David Schenk will be very familiar with that concept of failing, learning from mistakes, and having the resiliency to continue to pursue that. So that's sort of one creative pathway. The insight process is quite different and involves things like relaxing focused attention, suspending judgment, having a very high response to novelty. And so, again, we can see that some of those processes seem to be fairly generic, just like we saw for critical thinking. And in fact, some of them are pretty closely related. The ability to focus or to let up on the focus of our conscious attention. So that whole attentional control piece. Some are more mixed with when we're talking about the ability to synthesize and visualize. That implies some domain knowledge and some information that we're developing those things about. And then, of course, there are the blends, which is when we talk about having very broad activation of our cognitive workspace, that is drawing from remote parts of the brain information that we need to be able to look at something in a new way or solve a problem. That's, again, something that may sound a lot to all of us like working memory. But a very flexible working memory and the ability to entertain very different kinds of information all at the same time. So that's a bunch of skills and a bunch of things going on, and I thought it would be helpful now to look at these in the context of a model of mental processing, and to really see how all these things fit together, especially for those that I've characterized as being generic, that really seem to be applicable regardless of domain, regardless of discipline, regardless of sort of the knowledge base, and that are really then part of those critical thinking and creative processes. So what we can see here is that we can think of our mental processes as being divided into several different areas, and I have to close a bunch of windows so I can actually see it. Okay. The first being that obviously we take in sensory input from a lot of different ways through our eyes, our ears, our sense of touch, and all of these things can be characterized as reception. We have to be attentive, we have to organize, we have to select, and so some of the specific skills that are involved here, and Sarah's going to push that button and some of those are going to pop up, are things like sustained attention, divided attention, flexible attention. Note the connection of these concepts to the attentional control that's required for critical thinking and creativity. Visual and auditory span, discrimination, those kinds of things. Again, being selective in what we're seeing and being able to take in a bunch of information. So once we've taken that information in, then we can actually give it some meaning. And those processes can be grouped under the whole idea of perception. Things like direction and distance and timing, visual and auditory sequencing, being able to visualize, being able to see the relationships between. We talked when we were talking about critical thinking about sequential reasoning, the ability to actually keep things in a sequence and to adjust that sequence mentally. All those kinds of things are basic processes that are required of our brains no matter what the content or the substances that they're working from. And of course, all of these processes depend very heavily on memory, both sensory memory, that immediate image or that immediate trace of auditory information that we take in, our ability to hold on to it for a while, and then our ability in working memory to manipulate it, to actually activate a whole variety of parts of our brains and relate those pieces of information together to solve a problem. And then ultimately long-term memory as well, so that we have in our memory banks images and representations of data that we can compare everything that's coming into. Without memory, we really don't have the ability to understand much of the world around us. And then finally, all of these activities become conscious, and we use some very consciously controlled processes like logic and reasoning and planning to be able to understand this information, to relate it, to think of new things, to reason and connect. And so all of these processes are really basic to our ability to think and really connect quite directly to our ideas about creativity and critical thinking. And of course, many of you will also recognize that these are many of the skills that are developed in a program called Brainware Safari, which is a cognitive skills development program. Brainware Safari is the fourth technology that we're going to be focusing on, cognitive skills development in a technology platform. And it develops skills in these areas, 41 of them altogether. It comes from decades of clinical practice. Some of you on the call may have done this kind of work yourselves with students working one-on-one. And we took the best practices of a variety of different disciplines and incorporated them, married them with video game technology. It's generally implemented in a 10 to 12-week period, and Curtis is going to talk a little bit about the implementation and the experience at Harbor Beach. But the first thing I want to do is just to show you a little bit of the results from our initial published peer-reviewed study of the program. This was conducted in 2005 with students at the Christian Heritage Academy in Northfield, Illinois. Students were aged 6 to 13. They were divided into a study group and a control group. The study group used Brainware for 12 weeks, 3 to 5 times a week for 45 to 60 minutes. And the control group just went around about their normal life. So they were spending the time, the study group told us they gave up things like television watching or general kinds of play to, that's what the other students were probably doing while these students were doing Brainware, just whatever was part of their normal routine. So the first thing we want to show you is, we use the Woodcock-Johnson cognitive battery as the pre and the post test. So what you're seeing on this slide, on the y-axis, is the student's age. So the red bar is their actual physical age, and the 2 blue bars are for each of these students the pre and the post test. So the numbers at the bottom are individual student ID numbers. They really have no meaning other than that. But they will identify then for each student what their measured age on the Woodcock-Johnson was on the pre-test and then on the post-test. So what you can see on this is the control group, the group that did not use brainware, experienced an average improvement of 4 months over the course of the study between the two tests, just very close to the 3 months of elapsed time. So some went up a little bit, some went down a little bit. In general, not a lot of change, and pretty much what you would expect giving this kind of a test 3 months apart. The study group is a quite different story. And again, the slide is and the graph are set up the same way. The scale is different because of the degree of improvement that the students saw in their cognitive ability. In contrast to the previous slide, what you see is significant or improvement to some degree at least for every student, rather than some going up and some going down, and very significant improvement for a number of students. An average improvement of 4 years and 3 months compared to the time frame of 3 months. So this is now we have a slide of a young man named Jason, I think he is, using the program in Harbor Beach, Michigan. I'm going to let Curtis take over from here and describe how they got involved with Brainware Safari and what their experience has been.
Okay, thanks, Betsy. About I think it's 5 years ago now, I was online at Christmas time looking for some ways I could help my language learning disabled students and seeing what was out there on the web, and came across Brainware Safari. Reading their claims from the study that was published that we just saw, thinking, wow, this is impossible. So, but if it's true, then this is really one great thing to do. So I approached the superintendent of schools and the elementary middle school principal and made a proposal, showed them the study and showed them the program, and made a proposal to run our own study. And let's find out if we do the same things they did, if we get the same results. And the superintendent, being a person who was very student focused and achievement oriented, then agreed to do that. So we ran a program for 10 to 12 weeks with about 10 students in it. The teachers chose the students. They were from second grade through ninth grade, and there was absolutely no criteria. A couple of them were speech and language impaired students, a couple were learning disabled students, and the rest of the students were average to low performing students in the classroom. We gave pre and post tests of the Woodcock-Johnson, and then Monday through Thursday, we met after school for about an hour. The students were on the computer approximately 45 minutes, and they went through the Brainware Safari program. Initially, we all thought that it was a lot of fun. In fact, I was doing the Brainware program at the same time, and I would sit and do my program and answer questions. Eventually, I had to give up doing the program while the students were there because I couldn't concentrate on the program while they were asking me questions. It got to be too hard. But the students worked diligently, and for the most part, we had one student who, and I'm looking at the chart, seeing if I can identify him, and I believe it's covered up 4 from the right. Fourth from the right. He was a student that preferred to play hockey and go to hockey practice instead of coming to Brainware after school, and so that was okay. He would have done better if he had stayed at Brainware instead of going to hockey because he's not a very good hockey player. But our average growth was just over 3 years. We were very impressed with that. The student right there in the center that still falls below, made some progress but falls below his age level, was not identified at the time, but has since been identified as a student with a severe learning disability, and is still one of our students receiving special education services. But we were impressed enough with the results that the superintendent implemented some of those. Some more Brainware students went through Brainware Safari later on in the school year, a couple. Towards the end of the year, he came to me about one of our high school students who had taken the ACT test twice and had scored 31, 32 in that area on all aspects of the ACT, with the exception of reading, which he had scored a 21 and a 20 on, and wanted to know if I thought Brainware would assist him and help him get that score up. I had no clue. We had only worked with average to below average students and had no clue what would happen. So this student, because it was in the end of May, agreed to work on this through the rest of the school year, and then every day into the summer. He came into school 5 days a week and worked at his own pace. And when he was done, I post-tested him. He gave me a call, and I came in and we post-tested. Got the results back, and there was no significant improvement in any of the individual cognitive skills that the Woodcock-Johnson tested. So when I talked to the superintendent, I said, I'm thinking it didn't do any good. He said, well, let's find out. He's going to take his ACT test next month. So when he took the ACT test and we got the scores back, his other scores had remained relatively the same. His reading score had gone from a 20 to a 30 or 31. It was a 10-point jump on the ACT, which is pretty unheard of. And when we sat down and looked at that and talked about it, and since in conversations with Betsy and with Sarah, the best I think that we can come up with is that he had all of the individual cognitive skills that the Woodcock-Johnson was testing, but Brainware Safari also trains the brain to communicate across barriers, across from one cognitive skill to another, and all of the activities work on multiple functions at the same time. And that's what he was missing when it came to reading and comprehending what he was reading, was especially in the timed kind of situation that the ACT is, that he was missing those connections, and Brainware Safari provided the groundwork for him to make those highways in his brain, and provided him the ability to score higher on the ACT. The next year, I think Mr. Kraft ordered about 100 Brainware Safari licenses, and we used them with various students throughout the district, mostly middle school and high school, some elementary students that were having difficulties and needed some assistance, more in being able to process and to see things and to listen in class. And we had such a nice result from those, all anecdotal. We didn't do any pre-testing or post-testing on those, but used teacher grades to look at how the students were doing, and teacher reports and student reports. And then, so he was impressed enough that the third year, so that was 3 years ago, he made the decision, and the board supported his decision to implement Brainware Safari across the entire school district from third grade up. So every student, third grade through 12th grade 3 years ago, took Brainware Safari. And as a result of those, I can't say as a result, because we don't have definitive data that says that was the only thing, that was what did it. But we haven't implemented anything across the district that's new that would affect scores and things. And you can see on the slide in front of you that last year we were the fourth highest performing district for our size in the state. We're in the top 10 in the state for improvement in student achievement. Over that time, we've reduced our special education funding costs by 50% and reduced our population from 18% to 5%. And that 5% includes all of our learning disabled students, our cognitively impaired, and our autism spectrum disordered students. And so it's been a huge success across the district. The issue we have right now is that some of our teachers are saying we don't need to do Brainware anymore because, well, it's not having any effect. But when you sit down and chat with them, well, how were you teaching, and what were you teaching 4 years ago before Brainware, and where are you at now in your curriculum? And they realize that they're further along in their curriculum than what they were 4 years ago. The students are performing better than what they were 4 years ago. So my own personal conclusion and the conclusion of the superintendent that was here while we were going through this is that Brainware Safari is the primary reason that we have those improved scores. But I will put in a note here, because in talking to my colleagues in other districts, they say, well, what about teachers? Well, Brainware Safari doesn't negate bad teachers. The students still need to have good teachers and good curriculum, and it doesn't replace good teachers or good curriculum. It just gives the students all of the skills, the cognitive and thinking skills that they need to actually do better in class. During the study, we had an 8th grade student, and I'm trying to see which one he was if we wanted to go back. Third from the right back there, I think student 106. You see, he made the largest significant improvement of all of our students in the study. He had never gotten above a C in class, and for the most part, he was a D student. And about 3 weeks into the program, his science teacher came down and wanted to know what I was doing. And so we chatted a little bit, and he said, well, no, I don't want to know about the games you're playing. I want to know what science you're teaching him, because he got an A in class today, and he's never gotten an A, and it was on a test. And he said, and I know he didn't cheat. I just want to know how you're teaching him science, because I want to do that in my classroom. And so we showed him what we were doing, and then we sat down with the student and asked him why this was so different. Congratulated him on his A, and how did he think he got it? And he said, well, it's really weird, because for the first time, I'm able to follow Mr. Bowen's lecture, and I can take notes. And when he writes things on the board, I can take them from the board and I can put them on my paper, and I'm not 20 minutes or a half an hour behind him, because I'm always behind my teachers, but I'm not behind him anymore, and I don't know why. He made, in some of his individual test scores, made significant improvements from where he was functioning at a kindergarten level to, at the end of Brainware, he was functioning at a collegiate level on individual cognitive skills. And he graduated last year from school, and he graduated in the top 10% of his class. So that's kind of where we are.
I didn't even know that. That's new news.
Then you weren't listening at the presentation in Boston, because I said that.
Okay, well.
That's okay.
I
was talking fast.
I will do better. I will need to get my attention skills trained back up again. Anyway, that's great. So we need to get closer to a summing up here, and hopefully have time for a few questions. I just really want to show this slide again as a summary of how the technologies fit together, and a way of thinking about any technology that is being introduced in the context of how it fits within cognitive skills, whether it really addresses and is driven by what we know about the brain and the learning and teaching process, and then what the results are. And if we can really point to all those things, I think we can be a lot more confident in the kinds of technologies that we are implementing. So what I would like to do at this point is, I think we have one more poll, or one more little survey that we can introduce, and really just ask you to think about what are the kinds of things that you think have the most promise for helping students develop cognitive skills. Not necessarily these technologies, but these or other technologies, or even non-technology solutions. And we'll capture the information that you provide us and share them with the group as well. Hopefully we've prompted some thinking and challenge you to think about these things in a little bit different ways. And then also, while you're providing some answers to that, we'll let Sarah open up the floor for some questions and see if we have any. Were there any questions typed in, Sarah?
I'm trying to look right now. Hold on a second.
I know I know we're moving you around a lot today here.
But she's doing a great job.
She gets an A multitasking today.
We do have a question specifically about Brainware Safari, so you might want to mention how people can get more information about that, Betsy.
certainly be happy to do that. One place is our website, which is mybrainware.com. We do hold regular web-based demonstrations of the program where we talk about the research, show the program, and talk about various ways to do implementations. It's very interactive, and I would highly encourage that. And if you just go to our website, mybrainware.com, and if you're an educator or a clinician, depending on which path you go through, you will see a way to access a demo. And in fact, I think there's a link for the demo on our homepage. So would encourage you to do that. That's a great way. And the other thing, of course, is just to send one of us a note, and we're happy to provide more info. And I know Curtis has always been very gracious in speaking with schools and others who are contemplating using the program.
Yep, absolutely. Anyone that wants to talk about how we get more information about how Harbor Beach implemented it and how we're doing it this year or in the past years, just feel free to contact me. Betsy has my email and phone numbers.
There are no other questions in the chat, and I don't see any hands up, but I know that some people ask questions, put in questions when they registered. I don't have that up. If you do, Betsy, maybe you can pull up one from that.
Sure. This is an interesting question that somebody asked when they registered, Curtis, which is, there seem to be an infinite number of possible projects. How do you select the ones you want to do? How did, these things must have been among a whole variety of things that Harbor Beach considered. How did they prioritize, and how did they decide what to do?
Well, when we looked at ideas, you're right, there are a ton of them out there. The first thing we looked at was there any research that backed them up? And if there was, they came to the top of the pile. That's one of the reasons, and probably the only reason, that Brainware Safari managed to make the list, was that there was some research that was already published. Granted, for us it was online, and in our opinion, we couldn't trust everything you can't trust everything that's online. That's why we ran our own study. But that's what let it make the cut. The next thing that we looked at was which ones impacted learning the most, and so those rows, they were put in priority that way. And some of the things we want to make teachers, some of the things that we use, like the clickers and things, and the Mobies like that. What can we do to help the teacher become a more effective person in the classroom, reduce the amount of time they have to spend doing drudge work, and increase the amount of time they can spend working with their students? For example, the clickers, when they use those systems, I mentioned earlier that they download automatically into the teacher's electronic grade books. The teacher doesn't have to spend time checking papers, hand recording them onto paper or into an electronic grade book. That's automatically done for them. So that's an automated activity that we can do, that we could provide the teachers, that gives them more time and better feedback and more immediate feedback. What the sound field systems benefit teachers and students at the same time. And so, it's like, what can we do when we're in this environment? Those are the sort of things that we looked at.
And I think you also made that case for cognitive skills development.
Absolutely.
It helps the students, but as you pointed out, the teachers, having a class of students where the teachers can get the material and can operate a little bit higher level, has to be a real something that teachers would welcome as well.
It is something they welcome. I think we're able to delve a little deeper into questions and get deeper and more involved answers. Just so people understand what Harbor Beach is like, our free and reduced lunch has traditionally been well over 50%. This year, we are exactly at 50%, probably because of population loss, to be honest. But so we're not in a fluent district where our children have a lot of experiences outside of our community. So I just wanted
all the more important to introduce them to these
Absolutely.
opportunities. Yeah.
Well,
Curtis,
unfortunately.
thank you so much. Yep, I'm watching the clock too, Sarah. So
Okay.
we want to thank everyone again for being with us today, and especially thank Curtis for sharing all of his experience and wisdom with us. For those of you who are interested, we have another wonderful presentation coming up in January 24th, where Pat Wolf, who is the author of Brain Matters and has her second edition out, is going to be joining us, and we will be interviewing her about her book. So hopefully some of you will be able to join that and share the information with your colleagues as well. So thank you again. And Sarah, what have I forgotten?
Not anything I can think of. The recording will be up within the week, so if you have colleagues that you want to see it, you'll be able to share that with them at that time.
Thank you all. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.